Good morning. Welcome to this session, Confidence in Research. I ask you to take your seats. And my name is Tracy Brown. I'm the Director of Sense About Science. Today marks the launch of a report that's Confidence in Research that really does break a bit of new ground. And what we saw in the pandemic was that the connections between different research fields, between researchers and policymakers, the public, the media, commentators, and actually research users, people who are putting research into practice in things such as hospitals and transport policy. That kind of activity escalated in every country beyond measure. It broke down a lot of the boundaries that people, most of these sessions in Falling Walls, we've spent the last several years talking about how do we break down the boundaries between policy and science? How do we break down the boundaries between media approaches to things and the pace of science? And suddenly it all seemed to come together all across the world. It's been a really interesting journey from the perspective of researchers suddenly in a different context watching research unfold. There is so much to celebrate and learn from in that. There are things that a lot of people, my mum knows what a model means. She knows it's not Paris catwalk. She knows that that means something you do with maths. And there are all sorts of things that have come from this in terms of a broader popularization of understanding and engagement with research. There have also been some horrific experiences of people being misunderstood, misrepresented, attacked, and so on, and a lot of frustration, a lot of false leads, misinformation, all sorts of other things to grapple with. Now, for the first time, this is the crucial point, for the first time we were faced with the opportunity to investigate these things at scale. Normally, this is a debate that busts out over something like GMOs or mobile phones and these kinds of things. What actually happened was we had a broad picture across the world of everyone having roughly a similar kind of experience. And that was a fantastic opportunity. It's one that we've been at Sense About Science, which is a charity that promotes equipping the public with the means to ask tough questions about science. We've been talking about this with Elsevier and others quite a lot, and I am delighted that they've decided to take action on this position that they have of being a publisher of science across the world and to partner up with Economist Impact, which is the think tank of The Economist, publishes The Economist magazine. And so what we're presenting to you today is those first findings as a step to actually distilling that experience and figuring out what do we learn from this for those broader debates that we've been pushing for some time. I'm delighted to have Jonathan Birdwell with us, who sort of led the research. And Jonathan, this must be a day of some relief to you that we're here to talk about it finally. So Jonathan's going to give you a roller coaster ride through that research. And then Laura Hassing, who is the Elsevier's head of journals, she's head of all of their publishing. She has been, throughout the pandemic, kind of living the real lived experience of 24,000 editors around the world. So she brings that to the party, and I think a great deal of insight from it. And also Matthias Meyer, who's from the Kerber Foundation, and has particular interest, Matthias, in looking at the future careers of early career researchers. And this is important, isn't it? Because we're going to have a big think about what does that look like in these times? What is the 21st century experience for a researcher? So that's our kind of agenda for today. We have a very short time to get through it in, so I'm going to hand right over to Jonathan to kick off with those results.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Tracy says, it's an exciting day for us as we're launching this research. So Economist Impact, we are the think tank, the in-house think tank to the Economist Group, a publisher of the Economist newspaper. I don't write for the newspaper, but what Economist Impact does is does research on some of the big questions affecting society today. So with support from Elsevier, we wanted to look at how the pandemic was really sort of accelerating the emergence of a new landscape for science and research. Of course, science and research were changing already before the pandemic, new technology, social media changing the nature of collaboration, how science research was conducted and communicated. But the pandemic really seemed to accelerate trends towards open science, data sharing, remote and cross-disciplinary collaboration. And we saw science making extraordinary advances. The pandemic showed how the research community could come together to solve global problems, but it also showed some of the challenges. The massive increase in the quantity of research published, the speed at which it's published left even seasoned researchers struggling to determine the credibility of trustworthiness of research. And with the ubiquity of social media, of course, that also presented a lot of challenges for researchers. Now, of course, public trust in science, our premise was that in part depends on whether researchers themselves have confidence in research, and particularly those at the early stage of their career. So those were the questions that we had set out for ourselves. What was the impact of the pandemic? What impact did it have on the production and communication of research? Do researchers have confidence to embrace a more public-facing role? And are the support systems and incentives that are in place for researchers, are they fit for purpose in this new landscape? So I won't go into detail here. There's more detail on the methodology in the report. The centerpiece for the research was a survey, a global survey of researchers who are currently active in research. That survey was informed by a literature review, received critique and validation from an advisory board group. And overall, we achieved a sample just over 3,000 researchers. And an important thing to mention is that our findings are indicative. They're not representative of the research community, but we hope they provide a really strong basis for reflection, discussion, further research. And the survey certainly seemed to produce strong signals that really resonated with the researchers that we interviewed and that we observed in roundtables in Germany, in China, US, Japan, Netherlands, and the UK. So I'll quickly run through some of the findings, and I hope everyone will go and download the report. But first, let me start with the good. So researchers see a lot of benefits to increased attention, more of a public-facing role. They generally thought the research community did well. 64% of respondents thought the research community responded well to the pandemic. They're excited about the potential. They see the benefits of increased public attention leading to greater public involvement, greater knowledge of the research process, the opportunity to influence policymaking, and to improve the opportunity to improve social outcomes. Many also felt that increased public attention could lead to better research. 35% felt that that was a key benefit. And about 50% of the sample said they were now more inclined, with increased public attention on research, to ensure that their research was peer-reviewed, to share and express the caveats and uncertainty around communicating the research findings, and to align the research topics that they focus on with improving social outcomes. So those are some of the benefits. But of course, there are many challenges. In the research, about 2/3 of the respondents felt that the pandemic generally increased public attention on the research process, but only 38% felt that a legacy of the pandemic would be better public understanding of the research process. So there's that attention and understanding gap. You can see here some of the biggest challenges that researchers are concerned about: the politicization of research. And we saw this particularly in certain markets like Brazil and in the US, the oversimplification of complex research, and that lack of public understanding about how research is conducted. We also saw some concerns that the pandemic had exacerbated existing inequalities in terms of access to funding and resources, and that those concerns were felt most strongly by researchers in Global South countries, in early career researchers, and in female researchers. The concerns around the misinformation. 69% thought that the pandemic increased the importance of separating good research from misinformation. And while there was, I think, a sense that emerged in the survey, about half of respondents enjoyed going on social media to discuss research. They felt a responsibility to do so, but it is a febrile environment. 1 1/3 of our respondents either personally or knew a close colleague who had experienced online abuse. And as you can see here, 1/4 think or are worried that increased risk of bullying and harassment they see as a top challenge of increased public attention on research. So looking forward, we saw, I think, in the survey signals that researchers are already stepping up to this challenge, and many of them want support to do so. 78% thought the pandemic increased the importance of researchers communicating research findings to the public. We saw a notable shift in terms of an increase of researchers saying that actively countering misinformation is one of their most important roles in society as a researcher. But there is a confidence gap. We saw in the research very high levels of confidence when it comes to designing replicable research methods, when it comes to explaining research methods in public. But then when it comes to explaining research findings, particularly to policymakers, and as you can see here on social media, those confidence levels drop significantly. And you can understand why in that context of politicization and oversimplification. As I said, researchers are also excited about the opportunity to influence policy, but they see personal connections, communication skills, as really the driving factors as to whether policymakers take up a piece of research rather than the quality of the research itself. So what can be done? Well, we include a longer list of areas of action that have emerged from the researchers in the report, but just three to leave you with. The first is the researchers want more opportunities to engage with policymakers and to do so more consistently. Second, they want more support and communication in navigating this online environment. And third, yes, they need some changes to the rewards and recognition system. And this is particularly true for early career researchers. They want to see slightly less attention given to their publication list. They want to see more attention given to their commitment to teaching, to public communication, to influencing policy, and importantly to their contributions as peer reviewers themselves. So with that, I'll pass it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was brilliant. The report is a heck of a lot longer than Jonathan's slides, so that's really quite some feat. Laura, we want to know what it's like behind the lines, and really what you did this for.
Yes, happy to do that, Tracy. So let me indeed add some perspective from the publisher side. Because the pandemic was such an important moment for showing the importance of science, of research, and in particular the urgency that researchers felt to take on this role, to kind of collaborate together, which really accelerated these important scientific breakthroughs. And of course, at Elsevier, we were close observers of this whole process and the role that researchers were asked to play. Our colleagues at The Lancet, at the medical journal, The Lancet, they wrote about the coronavirus very early on, when it was hardly known here. And that was read by other researchers across the globe. And that really kind of created a sense of urgency amongst many researchers to kind of start working and really accelerate the work around, well, creating a vaccine, for example. And as a result, at Elsevier, we saw a huge spike in papers being submitted, not only about papers around COVID, but also actually other papers, because the labs were closed and authors had time to finally finish that paper. But of course, at Elsevier, that for us, that really kind of meant that we had to take a very a nuanced view on how to deal with that huge spike in research output. Because at one hand, we didn't want to do anything that would slow down the research. In anything, we wanted to help to accelerate, make sure that those articles went into the peer review process as quickly as possible. At the same time, of course, we also had to make sure that we really kind of maintained that high level of peer review, which is really important, because especially during a crisis like that, as a reader, you want to make sure that you can trust what you read. So there were several things that we did. We really helped, so we created a tool that helped editors to identify COVID-related papers, so at least we could prioritize those articles to go into the peer review process. We also developed tools for our editors to help them find reviewers. And that really helped to kind of prioritize those articles that, and get them out there as quickly as possible. But of course, it was important that we did not give in on that peer review, the level, the quality of the peer review process. So we also kind of clearly indicated to our editors that they should not kind of compromise. In addition, we and many other publishers made sure that all COVID-related papers were freely available in the resource center to make sure that any researcher, wherever in the world, was working on a COVID-related topic, that they would have immediate access to any relevant paper. And of course, it was also a role for us to play in reacting to the realities of the pandemic, because in some cases, researchers, labs were closed. They were not able to kind of actually do all the experiments perhaps needed to really kind of, which they would normally do before submitting an article. So our editors also were faced with the difficult task to sometimes really make that judgment call, right? Do we need to kind of continue now, despite the fact that not all experiments have been done? And in most cases, they got it right. In some cases, you know, they got it wrong, so it also resulted in us having to retract some articles later on. Ultimately, though, I think that, you know, it's, yeah, I think it was mentioned already before, I think it is really because of all the hard work that all these researchers did across the world that we were able to deal with the pandemic and that we were able to accelerate those scientific breakthroughs. And that's why I'm also so excited about the insights that are raised by the Economist Impact report, which Elsevier supported. It is clear that researchers have a new role to play. I think the pandemic created a fantastic opportunity because it really made clear what the power of research is. But it's also clear that researchers have to face some new challenges, having to do their research in the public eye, having to kind of have to deal with online abuse. And I think we collectively, as publishers, institutions, policy makers, we can do a better, I think, we can do more to really support researchers going forward. So there are some good results in the report. And I think, yeah, I'm really looking forward to discuss in more detail what we can do.
That's a very positive message to end on. Matthias, you, like Sense About Science, were also collaborative in this process of having some roundtable discussions throughout the research to try and kind of draw out what actions that might flow from it, what questions it's asking of us to better that relationship between research and the wider world. So over to you, your thoughts on where this has come out.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me here. I just want to mention two projects from the Kerber Foundation because that might give you an idea of what we are working on. And the first one is the Kerber European Science Prize. That might be the one you will know us for. And the prize winner from this year, Anthony Hyman, will give a talk just after this round in the big audience hall downstairs. It's one of the highly endowed European Science Prizes with €1 million. And I mentioned another project, the German Thesis Award, which is by far the biggest research competition in Germany for postdocs. And that might explain why I'm especially interested in the perspective of younger scientists, of early career stage scientists. For us as a foundation, it was more than obvious to participate in this project since basically all of our activities in the field of science are dealing with the relationship between science and society. And the goal there is not unconditioned or naive trust, to build naive trust. And therefore, I'd like to add a word in the title of the performance today. It's called Building Confidence in Research. And I would like to add the simple word building critical confidence in research, because that's what we are aiming for, a kind of critical open-mindedness against the findings and against the process of science. And given that interest for the relation between science and society, it's quite natural for us to ask what is the role and what are the responsibilities of scientists? And I think with regard to that question, we can learn a lot from the survey. And first of all, there is a fact, Jonathan stated it in his presentation, that gave me a quite optimistic picture about the future. And obviously scientists nowadays widely accepted that there is a kind of third mission besides research and teaching. And this third mission includes all relations between science and society, all exchanges. And 78%, you mentioned the number, 78% of all respondents are convinced that it has become more important for them to communicate their research results to the public. And this certainly doesn't tell us anything about the question, is this an externally imposed imposition to them, or is this a priority already woven into their self-image? And the number also doesn't tell us anything about the fact, does action follow? Yeah. If you're convinced you have to do, then that's a big step to do it already. Yeah. But the often repeated argument, we shouldn't distract scientists for their real tasks, namely teaching and research, doesn't hold any longer, I think, given that result. And the only truth is that this is indeed an additional task. And if it has to be carried out carefully and sensibly, it requires really time and financial resources for the scientists, but would also have to be taken into account in the recognition and appreciation mechanism, as both of you mentioned. And this is, I think, a long way to go. There lies hard work ahead of us. And with a look on the ticking clock here, I would like to mention two perspectives. So I think we should talk a little bit about the areas for action given this perspective. And I think it might be interesting to have a closer look at the perspective of early career stage scientists, but maybe we can come to that, to those later in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Matthias, thank you very much. I really appreciate those comments. And I think in particular, distinguishing what we're talking about here today from this is not hooray for science. You know, this is actually about trying to, you know, think critically about the information that we're getting. And it's also not trust me, I'm a doctor. That we're celebrating here. We're looking at, I suppose when we're talking about, I'm going to push it because they tell me that I can't come and walk among you, but I'm going to stand here. So I think when we're talking about confidence in research, what we're really talking about is, are the right things getting attention? Aren't we? Like, are we putting our attention on the right things? Is the right research making its way? And some of the things that bubbled around in these discussions were things like, it's the elite institutions that get all the attention, that publish all the papers, and not necessarily the best research. The WHO is complaining of a sea of research coming their way. How do you pick out the stuff that's urgent and important? How many of you are in research? Okay. Around half. Okay, and how many of you are in the business of communicating research? Okay, so between you all, you've got a pretty good perspective. I want to know from you, first of all, do you feel that the right things got attention or are getting attention? It may be that you just don't want to reference the pandemic here, but more generally, do you feel that? Are there places where you don't think that's happening, where the wrong things, it's because someone does good PR or some campaign group has got hold of a piece of information rather than the things that we urgently need to look at? So can we just get a bit of a view? Has anyone got a view on this? I'm sure you have some views. Can we just get a bit of a view from the audience here, thinking about this? Can I come around? Are you researching? Did you say you're researching in the front here? Can I ask you, what was your view? Did you think the right things got attention during the pandemic?
Shall I? Yeah, thanks. So yes, certainly critical things are getting attention, but I think the medial focus we have is like kind of creating a hyper focus. So we have hypes where a lot of attention is going. For example, we had combustion cars. Now we have hydrogen, and there's a lot of more stuff. And this hyper-focus is something I think that should get broken. So having a wider scope, because it's not that one challenge, that's something the system can improve on, in my opinion. Thanks.
Okay, so you're saying, is it a sensationalist focus or and also a narrow?
Yes, a narrow focus.
So this is driven by a media agenda. Yeah. Other thoughts about things that are influencing what gets focused on. Do you say you're in research as well? Yeah.
Are you giving us a Czech perspective? Yes, I'm giving Canada. I mean, I feel like, you know, whatever kind of trends on Twitter, kind of, you know, especially for academics who are on Twitter and like to talk about and share their stuff. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of what the media focus on, really. Like, you know, I work in the battery space, so, you know, right now every country's putting in, you know, goals to have everything EV by a certain time. So any news about a country putting in a new gigafactory or new, you know, but it is kind of narrow-minded, because it's like, wait, you have to think about where the materials are going to come from, and that is not something you can do in your own country, because it's really rare for one country to have everything they need to do this goal. And so there's so many more interdisciplinary things to focus on. So I understand like the journalist perspective, like you can't, you know, talk all day about it, but yeah, I feel like sometimes for, I guess, for policymakers, like why can't we just get the lithium we need to do, you know, do the thing we need? Well, there's a lot more complexity there. So, and as a researcher, you know, I think I'm unique that I have like that kind of view into that because we're so application based, but maybe more from fundamental stuff, it's a little bit more of a different scenario. But yeah, I think it's more media.
So that's interesting. Okay, I'm coming up to the back here. Oh, you can. We've got a microphone there. Yeah, brilliant. Do tell us what sort of space you're in, what area you're in.
In science communication, and did publish too, but not scientific background. Anyways, I think what you mentioned when it comes to politicization, I think this is a big threat to science communication. And I do believe that oversimplification as such is not a bad thing, to be honest, when it comes to actually being or having a ground for actually people understanding science and making them know why it is crucial to get a vaccine, for example. And I think this was a bad thing happening because politicians jumped in, took over the job of scientists, and this is why there was no trust building at all. Because usually you say there's only confidence and trust if you understand things, you know? And so I believe that a crucial job for scientists, besides publishing, could be translating science into something that is actually understandable. And I think this is the most, or for me, it would be one of the most crucial parts when it comes to climate crisis, publications. Honestly, there's so much research out there, but nobody really, honestly, politicians are taking over and telling us bullshit, you know? So this is why I think it's crucial that scientists also go more into the translation part and make also the idiot in the room understand what they're actually doing.
Okay, there's a lot of nodding going on to your point over here. Does anybody over here, did you want to, there's lots of nodding I saw going on to this point. Anyone willing to contribute a bit more on this subject? Policy? Yeah, come here. Oh, I'm coming to you, There we go.
So I'm an astrophysicist. I come from the global south, and I guess the views that I have, except for science communication, is that for early career researchers, especially students or people that are starting postdocs, there are no clear paths, for example, to communicate to policymakers, right? So I feel like this is such a niche topic that unless you actually know the people or that you actually engage, universities do not encourage this kind of activities, or I don't know, you know, like the European entities. So I think that is also like something that this other side of the table need to also account for.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll take that back to Jonathan. In the research, there was a bit of suspicion, wasn't there, that the way that people were getting attention for their research was whether they had contacts in the right places, and that some of that came from the Global South as well, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we asked, you know, what in their view they felt was the driver behind whether a policymaker took up a piece of research or a piece of research influenced policy. And the top responses were personal communications, personal connections with a researcher, between a researcher and a policymaker, the stature of the institution, and the communication skills of the researcher. That was over whether the research was novel or groundbreaking, over the sort of quality of the study design. And you know, you don't know to what extent that's a bit of sour grapes or if that's actually in fact the case. And so one of the things that I think exactly is your point that came out in terms of, well, what do we do, areas of action, you know, can we start to sort of formalize more scientific advisory institutions to be operating more consistently so that you don't just have to stand them up when the next crisis comes, but those connections are there. Because we also heard from policymakers as well, it was difficult for them, right? If they're facing a deluge of research, they have to make a quick decision. Of course they're gonna go, or you can see why they would go to people they might have connections with or might have more of an imminent stature, but we need to think about how we design systems to mitigate against that.
Yeah, okay. So this is a difficult one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we're all in the business of trying to get more connections going on. And on the other, we then complain that those connections are driving the focus. So we maybe need to have a big old think about, as you say, putting structures in place. And equal access, or at least some skills that enable earlier career researchers and others that don't necessarily, you know, they're not necessarily in the twilight of their careers and having dinner with all the right people.
Yeah, and that's right. And there is, I think, one finding in the survey which seems to me quite important. The pandemic crisis has a strong impact on at least 3 groups. I think you mentioned it in your presentation. The scientists from the Global South, women, and early career stage scientists. And as we learn from the figures, 48% of the early career stage scientists stated that the crisis increased existing inequalities and make their life harder in a way to in terms of getting access to funding and to research resources. And I think that's really an urgent topic because, as I said, the Kerber Foundation organizes the by far largest research competition for PhD students, and we have a lot of opportunities to speak with younger scientists. And in Germany, at least, we have still a very strongly stratified system. With PhD students on the one end and distinguished professors on the other. Yeah? And since especially scientists at the beginning of their careers are forced to fulfill the academic expectations of the system, namely to publish one after another article in hopefully most highly ranked journals, for them it's often a kind of obstruction against the system to engage in communication. And we organized last year a roundtable with younger scientists exactly to that topic. And the result of the discussion was it is still very hard for them to insist on the importance of public understanding of science. There are no credits, no degrees for it. There are very often no advantages with regard to their next step in careers. Right. And as long as young researchers are advised by well-meaning older colleagues not to waste their time with such additional tasks, and as long as an interview that doesn't went well can ruin your reputation, but a successful one makes no impact on your career, I think we have a problem. And what to do about that? Yeah. That's really a question.
Yeah. Tracy, can I just add, because I just wanted, because we're working really hard to kind of decrease the inequalities in research, but we did a study about our, on our the articles published at Elsevier in Elsevier journals during COVID, and we really looked kind of, okay, what is the impact on early career researchers, women, and authors from the Global South, and we actually did see a very clear effect during the pandemic, where the participation in terms of reviewers and authors for early career researchers, women and authors from the Global South went down. They were just impacted harder by the pandemic. And it really kind of set us back. So it's work to be done indeed.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to, there's a question coming over here, but I just want to quickly go to Ilan Shem here, who, because yesterday was involved in a discussion, and there was also concern that people struggle to get funding attention for their research as well, in terms of lacking those abilities to be in the right places at the right time. And you've worked very broadly with the Elsevier Foundation on the gender aspect of research. And is this something that you're picking up too?
Ooh, tough question, Tracy. I'm going to play the humble card here because while we do a lot of work trying to foster dialogue, and we're very proud to support the Falling Walls Female Leadership Development Program, I don't know that we have answers to that. What we do is try to bring groups together. You just heard from Andrea Guzman. She is one of the top talents from the Female Leadership Group. There are many others in the audience, and they will probably have better answers to this, much more targeted, because many do come from the Global South. So sorry, no answers here, but thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I picked up on some of the stuff that you've been publishing. I picked up that one of the first things that people say is, it's so nice to be noticed. You know, that I worked really hard all my career, didn't seem to work any less hard than anybody else, and it's so nice to feel noticed.
Yes, so if I can just say, what we do is bring together, but we also amplify, we celebrate, we create recognition mechanisms through awards, and that is a huge part to visibility. It really does help, brings the next opportunity. Thank you. Yeah.
And so, Jonathan, in the research, that's what one of the things, wasn't it? Was people were feeling worried that that research funding was going in the wrong direction, or was being sucked by people who who had the elite kind of positions already.
Exactly. I think whether there's a perception of inequality is tied to confidence, whether researchers have confidence in the sort of system. And so we wanted to get a sense of, was the perception. We didn't actually look at the money trails to know if that was in fact the case, but the fact that the perception is there, stronger, I mean, it was pretty high globally, but it was stronger among researchers in Brazil, in India, in South Africa, in other global South countries. It was stronger, as Matthias said, pretty consistent. I think it was 12 percentage points difference between early career researchers. So I think recognizing that perception is there, we need to think about how to address it, because I think that there is a fundamental link between whether researchers see the system as unequal and whether they have confidence in it.
Yeah. I'm going to come over here, and then I'll come back to you.
I wanted to come back to Matthias' argument, and I think it's very, very important. We are used as researchers at university to discuss what society and funding and stuff like that. But we avoid, and I'm doing now something very provocative, to speak about the governance. And what you were speaking about, the professors and the early stage researchers, these are homemade problems. And I think as long as we are not able to address this homework we have to do as a research community, it will be very difficult to change it. And you see it in many, many areas. If you discuss spin-outs and other stuff, it's sometimes the governance structure, which is a very hierarchical one, and it's very different to corporate world, to government and whatever. If we don't address this, it is very difficult to find also new and more efficient ways to communicate.
Okay, thank you. Very useful point. I'm going to give you a little response. I do want to pick up on something. Let's use these last 14, 15 minutes we've got to talk about the forward look and to think about, what can we do? Now, Matthias has mentioned incentives, and there's other things that we need to do to change this picture a bit, to make sure that we feel confident in the system, giving the right attention to the research that is the most rigorous, the most applicable to the questions we're asking. And what do we need to do? Is there one size fits all answer, or are there many? So you want to have a little response back on your question?
Yeah, so looking forward, I think one of the things that we can do is, for example, when we talk about the Global South, not to see it as a special entity, because, for example, global challenges as climate change is not going to be solved if we don't take into account, for example, the biodiversity we have in Latin America, in Brazil, if we don't protect the forest, for example. So I think that having this more holistic approach of system analysis, that we are not going to solve this just by having a Eurocentric perspective or American-centric perspective, but there needs to be mechanisms to also include these other researchers that also influence policy, because this is not just European policy trying to do something in the global south or in other countries. This needs really to be a global approach. And so I really I put emphasis on that. We need to make or to open mechanisms to include more of these views.
Yeah, you remind me of the fact I've just been working with somebody who's researching in northern Nigeria, and her complaint is that northern Nigerian universities don't get the same attention on their research as the rest of the country. So there's within-country concern that important research is going on as well, not just between countries, isn't there? There's things we need to look at, whether elite institutions. In the UK, we complain about this all the time, that the top 5 get everything. Right down here.
Thank you. Leonhard Möckel from the Max Planck Institute for Science of Light in Erlangen. Regarding this look forward, I wanted to maybe ask a little bit of a provocative question with respect to science communication, which is if we communicate the right thing or in the correct way or to the right people. Reasoning behind this question is that I would actually argue that it has been never easier to inform yourself about the scientific process and progress as a member of the lay public. So newspapers, journals, YouTube videos, experts communicating in a very understandable way what's happening. Not on everything, it could be more, but it has never been more than right now. And at the same time, we're facing this odd dichotomy that trust in science is either staying constant or even dwindling, especially in first world countries. So the question is if this kind of panacea to say better science communication will solve the problem. I don't think it's wrong, but the question is what actually do we mean with science communication? Is it just a better understanding given to the lay public about what's going on? Is it maybe also like more of an emotional way how to present ourselves to the lay public? Or is it something completely else? I would be curious to hear from everybody in the room. Thank you.
Tracy, can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
Because for me, that's absolutely the key question, right? It goes back to the comment that was made earlier, kind of building critical confidence. Because I agree with you, it's probably easier than ever as a layman to kind of get kind of the scientific information. The question is, can you trust it? And you are dependent as layman on the translation that's being made for you in order to kind of have the right understanding. So for me, that gap between public attention and public understanding and making sure that as a layman, you can also trust what you read and what you get to you, for me is critical. And how do we do that? And how do we, whose responsibility is that to make that translation, that trusted translation? What's the role of the researcher? What's the role of the publisher? What's the role of kind of the journalist in that? For me, these are really key questions.
Laura, you would, I'm sure, want to say that all across Elsevier journals, the best, most rigorous research is what gets published. But you must also recognise that there is a big sea of work out there, much of which didn't really warrant the public's attention, so the public could go looking and find all kinds of things that were preprints, tentative results, first findings, not replicable. There's a lot of research that's not replicable out there.
Absolutely, and as a layman, it's really difficult to make the kind of the distinction, right? What was based on trusted research and what was not based on trusted research. But even, I would say, for the research that was published with Elsevier and had rigorous peer review, we have an obligation to make the right translation, because even there, if you put, and that's the thing, right? Science is not black and white. It's gray. It's about nuance. It's not neat or definite, right? It's about the discussion, experimentation. So, in order to make the right translation and put it into context, even if the research is of high quality, I think is something that we have to get better at and support research in order to get that done.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There was another hand that I overlooked. Sorry. Yeah, I'm coming up here. Yeah, come here.
I just want to echo what the gentleman up here said, because I think this comes down to this idea. There's always this idea of a Dunning-Kruger effect. This idea, if you have a little bit of knowledge, you become very confident in your understanding of a topic, and as you become more entrenched in a topic, you become less confident because you really understand the nuances of it. And I'm always just curious what this dichotomy is. We give people a little information, you teach a little bit of science. Where is that step over point? Because there is this danger point. I think that's what we're seeing in the fact that we have at this moment in time more knowledge out there than ever. And yet at the same time, there's this disbelief in it because people become so confident and then they bring their own policies, their own preferences, what they want to see come out of it, as opposed to following a little deeper. So I'm wondering if you can just go a little deeper in that question, because I think it really is critical to the whole idea of confidence in research and confidence in science.
Yeah, and that's a very nice thing to throw into this mix. Actually, I think that there's some work needs to be done to demonstrate that, and also it kind of is the other part of the question, isn't it? Of do we have enough to answer the question? We might have enough to answer the policy question, but we might not have a definitive answer, for example. Can you pass that forward there? I'm going to come back to my panel very briefly in a moment, just quickly take another question.
Hi, I'm a researcher at Imperial College, and I wanted to iterate on the quality, high quality research, and that's what's getting published. What can you say about, researchers that have no access to the omics, for example, facilities that really are necessary to publish in a very, very, high impact journal? So what can we do to kind of have high quality research that doesn't necessarily have access to the most, state of the art, latest technologies that allow you to really get published in those type of journals?
Great. I want to take a bit more on this, so from Matthias and Laura, and then spend the last few minutes just to sort of get everyone thinking a bit more also about that question of bridging that gap that Jonathan pointed out between the recognition of the role of the researcher being different and the confidence that it's going to work out okay. So let's finish there, but let's talk a bit about this side of things a bit more. I take Matthias and then I'll go to Laura.
Yeah. I just want to make two comments on contributions from the audience. The first one from the colleague from behind who said this is a homemade problem in science, and it lays in the scientific system itself. And I think I want to strongly agree with that statement. Do your homework, in a way. Nobody fosters you, nobody forces you to not incentivize and not acknowledge contributions in science communication. That is mainly done by the scientific system itself. Yeah, that's your job to change things. That's the one comment I'd like to make, and I want just to comment on the contribution from the young colleague from Max Planck, who asks what is the right way to do science communication in a way. Do we the right thing? And I think there is another very interesting finding in the survey, the one that's in a way most important for me, and that finding says only 38 respondents believe that the pandemic has led to better understanding of research among general public, to better understanding how does science work as a process.
Yeah.
And I think that's very close related to a discussion we have in Germany at the moment at the Factory Viscom process driven by the BMBF from last year. And we have a kind of shift from a push approach of science communication to a more dialogue and participation.
I love that. I love that as the challenge that we're going to end on, Matthias, very much so. I think equipping people with the right questions to ask as much as giving them all the answers is the really crucial thing. I'm going to take a very quick question at the back and then give my speakers less than a minute each.
Hello, I'm Jean-Claude Bergman from the University of Brussels and the Frontiers Research Foundation, and in between I spent a few years at the Commission on this topic, by the way. So I think we overstate the problem of confidence in research. I mean, people take a plane, they don't question the engineering behind it. Billions of people took a vaccine, millions questioned it, so the proportion is minimal. So there is a lot of confidence in research, and what is getting questioned are the consequences, the lockdowns and so forth, but not the science itself. And my question if it was digged in the question in the survey is the following: for me, the obvious way, the most easy thing to do to create a level playing field for high confidence and reproducibility, and allowing the South and whoever feels not part of the big system to be able to be part of big science, is that we make the publications and the data underlying publications open, so that you can reuse it wherever you work, so that you can redo it wherever you work, so that you have the same starting conditions.
Okay. I'm not sure that I'm one of those people that just follows everyone else onto the plane. I don't think about the engineering. If everyone else is getting on, I'm getting on. Okay, you've got less than a minute. In fact, you've got 40 seconds, Jonathan, to tell us what we should be taking away for action.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on some of the points here, because I think one of the things that came out was the need for more research on the communication of research. And I think it's a really interesting point that there might be this sort of, sweet spot to sort of maximize that sort of public trust. And I think there is an emotional element to it. You're right. The ability to go out, if people want or they're motivated to do that and find out more, is there, more than it ever has been. But we also have to recognize this point around misinformation, disinformation, right? And there are people, including political actors, who want to take an advantage of and use misunderstanding or misinformation to mobilize political bases. And so, I think we need to take a much more sort of strategic approach in looking at who are the actors and what are the messages around misinformation, disinformation, because they are inevitably in this mix, and they complicate the picture, and some of them have a vested interest in undermining public trust.
Okay.
So I'll stop there.
And of course, there's well-meaning misinformation. Lots of that in the pandemic.
This is the thing. We need to have a much more fine-grained understanding of the misinformation versus disinformation, what's driving them, and what we can do to push back on them.
I love that. Almost like a topology, a guide, a rough guide. Laura, you've got
less than 1 minute.
20 seconds.
Yeah.
20 seconds.
So I partly agree with the gentleman at the back, but I'm also an optimist. So I think if I balance the two sides, I would also argue that all in all, I think actually the pandemic was good for science, because it has really raised the profile and the importance of science, and also trust and confidence in research is vital for our collective ability going forward to tackle the biggest global challenges. So for me, I haven't found the answer yet. I don't think we've found the answer, but for me, really making that trusted translation is key.
Okay, Matthias, give me 10 seconds at the end. No, go ahead. Go ahead. The last 10.
Yeah, the first thing I would like to stress again is what we need in future is more of participatory formats of science communication. Yeah. And the second thing I want to mention is another question we haven't stressed on, the shift of science communication in the online world. And I think that's a very urgent challenge too for all of us.
Threat and opportunity. But what an exciting place to end. Thank you so much to my panel. Brilliant questions and comments, but a really positive look forward. Thank you.